Winston Churchill is a pretty problematic guy, very controversial, but always interesting. When talking about the past, we have to acknowledge that some of the people that are held up on the pedestal could be some pretty crappy people. Today, I want to talk about Operation Dynamo, even though I am permanently paranoid that anytime I do a World War II video, it's going to get taken down by TikTok. Don't! And this is where I find some of his redeeming qualities. A lot of other British officials were ready to lay down for the Germans. They didn't want this fight. He is somebody who always remained wary. And it became more and more evident that Churchill was right about the Germans. So when it came to the German soldiers invading Belgium and France and choking out Allied soldiers to the point that they had nowhere to run, trapped on the beach, he found a workaround and saved the lives of countless of Allied soldiers. We're talking Dunkirk on History Talk. To understand the events that led up to World War II, you have to start with World War I, and I want so badly to do a series on it, but there is such... It's too much. There is no straight line through the narrative of World War I. That's simple. World War I is caused by nationalism and alliances. And while Germany was technically fighting with the bad guys, they were more so in an alliance with the bad guys, and they just happened to have the better army. So what you see is Germany bringing it for their alliance, and as the war ends, they get all the fallout. That's when I say on History Talk that simple truth is never pure and simple here, ever. There are layers. And just like I said at the end of my French Revolution series, when there is chaos, there's always somebody waiting in the background to take over. In this case, you know who, because I don't want to flag TikTok's audio filter when I say his name, but you know who. As I've explained in the last two videos, I'm only going to refer to the German bad guy by his initials because TikTok does have an audio filter that picks up on certain words and takes out your audio, even if it is history. So that is AH. Right around the time Churchill's taking leadership, they had known the Germans were declaring war on pretty much everybody. But nothing major had happened. As such, there were Allied soldiers in France, Belgium, kind of just waiting to see if anything happened because they thought if it did, they could just, pack it up and drive the Germans back. They didn't know what AH was capable of. This is the Maginot Line. This is a fortification that is on the line of Belgium, France, and Luxembourg and Germany. Left over from World War I, basically. And for some optimistic reason, the French really thought that those kind of old school stone fortifications would stop tanks from rolling in. They got the surprise of their lives when it didn't work. We're going to fast forward to May 10th, 1940. And France and everyone else is feeling pretty confident that the Maginot Line with the fortifications can keep the Germans out. There's also a really unguarded section in the forest of Ardennes. And they're thinking, there's a lot of trees. Tanks can't get through trees. No, they can totally go through trees and stone walls. They're tanks, which had evolved significantly since those walls were built. Oops. So now there had been so many instances where the Germans could have been stopped early on, because at this point there were more Allied soldiers there than there were German soldiers. But everybody was still tired from World War I. At least that's my theory. And they thought, there's the treaty. It's going to be fine. They didn't count on a lunatic. I said it, and I do it again. Bop, bop. What follows next is a series of events that end up putting a chokehold and dividing the British army, as well as the other Allied armies of Belgium and France, making communication almost impossible. The German army moved pretty easily through the forest of Ardennes. It was thick, but they got through it. And the French and Belgian soldiers were shocked, and they decided to head up through Belgium to get away. But aggressively, they were followed by the Luftwaffe and other soldiers and motorized tanks. They were able to avoid the Maginot Line completely by going through the forest. And now what's going to happen is that a U-shape is going to be formed in the following countries: the Netherlands, Belgium, and France. And they are strong. The German army is so strong. And while the Allies are outnumbering, they're now being split apart by this maneuver. The German army eventually makes it to the sea, and that has effectively divided everybody into half. And now they can't communicate with each other. And there are going to be a lot of people trapped with no way out. This is John Vereker, the 6th Viscount Gort. Can somebody make me a title like that? Like Melissa Viscountess of something? I don't know. He's the head of the Royal Expeditionary Forces. And he's pinned. Way pinned. And he's suddenly realizing that evacuation is about the only choice he has right now, but how are they going to do that? He has somewhere around 400,000 men, give or take. The Germans are closing in, and he realizes he has no other option but to retreat. And so he takes all those men all the way from the Belgian border to the beaches of Dunkirk, France. What follows is one of the greatest, and I know I am prone to over-exaggeration, but no, seriously, one of the greatest evacuations that was done almost entirely by civilians, including our old friend Charles Lightoller. There was no reason that the Germans could not have single-handedly crushed the remaining forces, but they got a little bit of luck. You do have some forces who are fighting in the back, trying to keep the Germans away so that the front lines can move forward toward the beaches, but they're surrounded entirely. The only thing they have in front of them is the English Channel. They did get a little bit of luck when the tanks that were in the front for the German had to stop and wait on the rest of the army because they were too fast. They were ordered to wait. And that buys them some time to figure out, okay, what the hell are we going to do now? Now let's go back to May 10th. Have you ever had a shitty first day on the job? Winston probably has you beat. That was his first day on the job as Prime Minister. And here we have the Germans invading the country and trapping people. Yeah, he wins. But he had been warning people about Germany for so long, and they were treating him like he was crazy, when all along he was right. It seems intuitive for us that the right call was to evacuate these guys because France was going to be a goner. And there was nothing they could do about it, really. But Winston's like, we can't. If they get captured, we don't have much of an army anymore. That was a lot of men. And yet, some people kept arguing with him that maybe we should just, make a deal with AH. And I would do it again. Lord Halifax was one of his biggest critics who was like, well, it wouldn't be so bad. Maybe we can just, keep the peace while he is, killing a lot of people. Oop. But really what Halifax wanted was for Britain to just stay the hell out of it like Switzerland or like the United States was doing at this point. We didn't want nothing to do with that. If they had surrendered early, they probably would have been able just to be, chill, relax, have some tea while the world burns. Churchill said, hell no. The situation was continuing to deteriorate. The Luftwaffe knew what they were trying to do, and they began destroying docks and all the warships. The men were more stuck than they had been before. And even with sending in military vessels, the numbers for people that were estimated to be rescued were freaking small. It wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to send the warships. The Luftwaffe was going to take out as much of the, boats as they possibly could. Plus, the docks were destroyed. The boats couldn't dock anywhere because the water was too shallow, so they were going to have to swim out. The beach was divided with an east and west concrete barrier that some of the boats could get to. But that was about as close as it could get. So they knew they had these large ships. But how are they going to get people to the ships to evacuate? That's when the BBC sends out a panicked call to all boat owners. It's time to visit an old friend, God's favorite, Charles Lightoller. If you missed my series on him, dude survived the Titanic, a sinking ship in World War I, and now he's getting ready to go kick some ass. Lightoller took his yacht, the Sundowner, which you can still visit today, and he was getting really impatiently tired of waiting on everybody else to, leave fast enough, so he sets off pretty much on his own. His son was on board, but he and his boat were in the open water. The Luftwaffe was out there attacking warships and was also, buzzing these yachts that were coming in. They knew what was up. Lightoller did an interview on this, and it cracks me up. They asked him, where you fired at, or did you meet any enemies on the way? This is his response. Listen.
Well, yes, we had lots of fun on the way. The first one was a couple of enemy bombers had a shot at it, and fortunately, Worcester...
So there wasn't really anybody around him except for a warship, but that warship tended to scare off the fighters. His story gets better from here, though, at Dunkirk. It's crazy. I'm telling this part of the story from Lightoller's perspective just because, one, we all know him and love him, and it's a good indicator of how this was going for the civilians, even though he, was a sailor, who were trying to help. He finds a flaming warship that has been bombed and begins rescuing crew members off of that. About a half a mile away, he says that the, quote, petrol, or oil, blew up. If they had been left on that ship, they would have died. Fast forward when he gets to another warship that is incredibly crowded. They ask him how many people he can take. Now, he had previously had about 21 people on his yacht, but he lied about the capacity so he could save more people. He told them,
Worcester. I went on board and saw the captain and told him I could take a few men. Well, he said, how many? Well, I once had 21 on board. I didn't tell him that. I told him, about 100.
He lied to save more people. Sir, I am in love with you. This evacuation was taking days, and the French never get the credit they are due at Dunkirk. Let me try to change your mind about any thoughts you had about the French in World War II. They knew they were goners. They were watching things fall like dominoes around them. And just thankfully there had been enough time bought by that front line of German tanks waiting for command that they, the back line, mostly of about 40 to 50,000 French soldiers, began fighting the Germans to buy time for the British to evacuate the island. I mean, it was pretty clear World War II was not going to be won if there was no British army. The French knew that. And they sacrificed themselves in a losing fight to give the people on the beach enough time to evacuate. As soon as they got the all clear, they surrendered. And that's the thing that drives me crazy when people do the whole surrender monkey thing, because that was strategic surrendering. They saved about 400,000 people with that move. The Germans managed to close in by June 4th. So what did that mean? The evacuation had been miraculously successful. Initially, they thought maybe we can save 45,000 people. With the help of the civilians, like Charles Lightoller, they saved 338,000 Allied soldiers from Belgium, France, and British, of course. That does not mean that some people did not get left behind. And that's devastating. Some were killed, some were taken prisoner. And though many people could see evacuating and having to retreat as a failure, Churchill delivered an amazing speech where he reminded people, this is good. That we have saved these people means we can keep fighting. And he was right. America likes to take a lot of credit in World War II. And yes, we were badass, but you don't win Europe without the British.